I wrote Reservoir Dogs, on the title page of the script, not the title, the second page inside of the title page, I dedicated. I said the following inspirations, and I named a bunch of people. I actually wanted to put it at the beginning of the movie, but then I thought it was like too cheap to like, oh, like me because of who I like, all right, you know, kind of thing. So I thought it would work better without it. But it was definitely in the script, all right, to kind of let you know where it was coming from. Tim Curry is one of the great eccentric character actors of all time, and actually I'd read, he came in and read for Joe Cabot, and it was kind of between him and Lawrence Turney. Oddly enough, I didn't hire Timothy Curry because I'd heard he was so crazy. All right, he never would have been as bad as Lawrence Turney at his craziest. Well, his craziest could be just as bad as Lawrence Turney, but I don't think he would have been at that time. Timothy Curry also had this, but oh God, he was great. Timothy Curry he talked like this, and he was in these Kubrick films, and he's a crazy fucking guy. I mean, one of the weirdest fucking actors ever. And it's like he had this passion going on about farting. All right, it was like almost like a religion to him. That people kill themselves by holding in their flatulence. All right, by like, you know, when you have to fart, you don't fart, so you're holding it in, and you're having these toxic gases that are actually killing yourself. You're letting methane into your system when you're supposed to let it out. That's the way your body's supposed to work. But society has now stopped us from doing that, and we're making our lives shorter by not like letting go of where we're holding on to our poison to be polite. All right, you know, so people should fart. That's one of the things that they should do. All right, you know, and so when he calls up, I read this script and I loved it. I give it 5 farts. Under the Toth doesn't really have a big influence on Reservoir Dogs per se, but I'm a big fan of Andre de Toth. He was one of the, and now people kind of know who he is a lot more now. Scorsese has championed him quite a bit, and he wrote a really good autobiography and everything, but at that time, I was one of his only, you know, I mean, there were some critics who were champion, but he was one of my favorite of the 50s, you know, genre, either westerns with his Randolph Scott westerns or his crime thrillers like Crime Wave with Sterling Hayden and Charles Bronson, that I was a big fan of. All right, so he was one of my, like, you know, darlings of you know, hero directors of that period. It's funny, I'm not really a big fan of Chow Yun-fat anymore. I'm kind of like over him now, all right? But I was hugely influenced by Hong Kong cinema at the time. Like, it should have not say, it should say John Woo in there instead of Chow Yun-fat. It does, well, there you go, okay. But I was really taken with Chow Yun-fat a lot at that time. I was like, I thought he was one of the cooler actors to come out in movies in a long time. He kind of had this Chinese Alain Delon quality. And when I saw, not even The Killer, but when I saw Better Tomorrow, Part 2 in particular, all right, it's like I got a big long coat like him, all right, and I got a pair of glasses like him. I put a matchstick in my mouth and like walked around for about, like, you know, 3 months dressing exactly like Chow Yun-fat. I'm not really a big fan of Jean-Luc Godard anymore. I think Godard is like the way if you're like a young artist, or especially, I'm not talking about fine art, but more like, you know, comic book kind of art or something. You know, I think Godard is a little bit like a Frank Frazetta. You kind of like, you get into him for a while, and he's like your hero for a little bit, and you start drawing shit like him, and then you kind of outgrow him. I think that's kind of what Godard is for at least for me anyway, as a filmmaker. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, I just think I've outgrown him. Godard was so influential to me at the beginning of my aesthetic as a director, of like wanting to be a director. His kind of like lack of complete any type of film style, just wanting to make movies for love of it. Godard is the one who taught me the fun and the freedom and the joy of breaking rules. You know, setting up a close-up on the back of somebody's head as opposed to, you know, and just fucking around with the entire medium, all right, and breaking rules. But I consider Godard to be to cinema what Bob Dylan was to music. I haven't grown out of Dylan, I've grown out of Godard, all right? And I'm not kicking the old guy, all right? It's just I've grown out of him now. While I say I've outgrown Godard, I haven't outgrown Pauline Kael's reviews of Godard. And the most influential piece of film criticism I've ever read of my aesthetic that applied to me very young. I remember reading it at Philippe's, that French sandwich place. All right, I had one of Pauline Kael's books, and I'm reading her review of Band of Outsiders, also known as Band Apart, which I named my company after. She's reviewing Godard's movie, and she says, it's as if a couple of movie crazy young Frenchmen were in a coffee house, all right, and they've taken a banal American crime novel and they're making a movie out of it based not on the novel, but on the poetry that they read between the lines. And when I read that, I was like, that's my aesthetic. That's what I want to do. That is what I want to achieve. Melville, I haven't grown out of. Melville is the Godard I haven't grown out of. All right, I love Melville's take on genre. I think Melville, along with Sergio Leone, is probably the greatest reconstructionist of genre, and really delivering completely in his own way. All right, he knows the rules of gangster films, and he was in love with the gangster films of the 30s and 40s, the film noirs of the 40s and the gangster films of the 30s, and he took the same similar plots and took banal American crime novels and did them his own way, and really, not in the my way or Elmore Leonard way, but in his own way, had real life intrude upon them, all right, in really great ways. But another critic said this about Melville's work, and boy, it is so true, and it is, again, one of the things I held on to, is Melville was probably one of the major French influences on the New Wave. The French New Wave was battling what they considered the boring, fucked up bourgeois cinema of France at its time. Melville was the only older guy doing cinema that was inspirational to them. And if you look at Les Dolos, or Babli Flamme Bleue, or what's that one? Second Breath, or something like that. And then Les Samurai. You do get a sense, there's an aesthetic working in Melville's work, that you get a sense that you don't have to know how to make a movie. If you truly love cinema with all your heart and with enough passion, you can't help but make a good movie. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to know a lens, a 40 and a 50 and fuck all that shit. Crossing the line, none of that shit's important. If you just truly love cinema with enough passion, and you really love it, then you can't help but make a good movie. Lionel White wrote the novel that The Killing was based on, which, by the way, I never read. All right, I've never read his novel. I've read a couple other novels by Lionel White, but Reservoir Dogs was never people people took a sentence that I said once and said that I was I ripped off The Killing, or it was a paraphrase remake of The Killing. I was making a heist film, and I would say, this is my The Killing, and that means basically it's I wrote Lionel White because I didn't want to thank Kubrick. All right, I have a sibling rivalry with Kubrick too. All right, same thing with Orson Welles. Fuck those guys, they ain't so good. All right, they ain't so hot. Yeah, they're okay, but Jesus Christ. Well, John Woo was a big, major, hero to me at the time. I was just so influenced by Hong Kong cinema. All right, to me, I thought, and to this day, I still think it's the most invigorating cinema that's made in the world. All right, and to just, there had been no really in the '80s. Jesus Christ, was the worst time for action filmmaking ever. There was really Walter Hill. It was off his game. All the older guys died. Aldrich, Peckinpah, it was really, there was James Cameron, that was it, and he was fantastic, but there had not been a Sergio Leone or anybody that come out and shown us what we'd seen before, but in a completely new eyes, and until John Woo. And one of the last names in that dedication was Lawrence Turney, who I didn't know I was going to be able to cast him in the movie or not, but just I wanted a couple of guys two crazy, out there, fucking eccentric actors like a Timothy Carey and a Lawrence Turney that were still alive, that could you know, I could mention a lot of guys who were dead, but I wanted to mention a couple of guys that were a brand of cinema and a brand of actor, of eccentric, wild actor that basically you shoot them and it's like, you know, you send it to the lab, it's like worth developing. All right, you got something. All right, they're worth sending to the lab. All right, and Lawrence Turney was just a wonderful touchstone to the kind of filmmaking I wanted to do.